Organizations often talk about inclusion, engagement, and values. This episode goes deeper by showing how sense of belonging at work is built through accountability, trust, and systems that reinforce human dignity. Joe's story gives listeners language for belonging, especially those navigating imposter thoughts, exclusion, or leadership pressure. It reframes belonging as the outcome, not just another initiative. Hello, friends, and welcome to I Know I Belong When, an innovation unbiased production where bold voices, curious stories, and authentic impact amplify knowing that you are invited, seen, heard, and needed. Our conversations go from the boardrooms to the break rooms, from the sidewalks to our living rooms, from our relationships to ourselves. We explore the full spectrum of belonging, the joy of being seen, the pain of being left out, and the courage it takes to build spaces where every identity is welcomed, valued, and loved. We also hold space for each of our unique identities to joyfully prosper and thrive. I am your host, Christopher Bylone, someone who believes knowing you belong is a birthright. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the show. Today's guest does not just talk about culture, he builds it, he engineers it, and he occasionally cuts through dysfunction with a sword fighter's tenacity. Joe Machicote is a retired CHRO of 35 years of HR leadership under his belt, though do not mistake retired for resting. He is a culture officer by calling, organizational culture engineer by craft, and an IFC certified executive and an NPL coach who knows transformation is not a buzzword, it is a decision. He is also the author of Own Thy Stuff, because accountability is sexy, and someone had to say it out loud. When he is not championing mental health as board president of Mental Health America of the Central Carolinas, Joe is about to earn his black belt in Kumue Korean sword fighting, proving he can bring both emotional intelligence and actual edge. He is a believer that leadership starts with self-awareness, scales through trust, courage, and connection. Joe, welcome to I Know I Belong When.
That was great. Thank you so much. What a great introduction.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I have been so excited. I have been so excited and waiting for this day to, join the cool club.
So you've already been part of the cool club.
Yeah, this is cool, Bill, too. This is very cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So you have worn the CHRO hat for 35 plus years, but you call yourself a chief culture officer, an organizational culture engineer. What's the difference? Why do most leaders get it wrong when they think culture is a vibes problem instead of a systems problem?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Progressively, I've gone through HR in just about every role that there is to serve. And I had mentors that tell me, hey, you know what, you would be a great CHRO. So I did it. I worked my way into that position. And what I found was, at the CHRO seat, you certainly can influence culture, but I really wanted to be in the design and building seat of it. So, most organizational development professionals report to a CHRO. When I was in the CHRO seat, I would tell my head of organizational development all the time, I really want your job back so bad. So it was absolutely amazing for me. It's where I have the most fun. And part of it is because I like watching individual development. I like those individuals morph into teams and how teams relate and interact, and ultimately building the culture. So that's where I decided to spend my full time in HR, is designing that. So it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where when we get to watch an organization grow, especially I loved when I got to see people who started as an individual contributor, and then they got their first management role, and then they got their first people manager role where they were managers of managers. And just watching them grow and seeing how they've changed and they morphed and the mistakes they've made and the successes they have, it's almost being like a choreographer, right? I was a dancer when I was in high school and college, and I actually enjoyed being the choreographer more than I was the performer, because I got to see the work actually come to life, right? When you're the performer, you only see your part through your eyes, but then when you're the choreographer, you get to see all the intricate pieces moving around the stage. And I think it's the same way when we talk about organizational development and talent development, that same type of philosophy. So it's really cool about going, yeah, I really want your job back.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of annoying for him, I'm sure. But
Yeah,
but
because
for
it's
me,
like, can you just let me do my job, please? Like, go off and do yours, right? But hey, it's a lot of fun, right? Okay, friends. So you have a book and you call it
Yes.
Own Thy Stuff. And you've said
Yes.
accountability is sexy, which is like music to my ears. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think when people are able to own their stuff, it pulls them into you. It is attractive. There's so many people that go through their daily lives just doing what they do. No apology when it really should be necessary. No accountability for owning mistakes. And we're human. We're gonna make mistakes. But how do we own up to it? My favorite display of that is in sports. I played sports, I'd watch basketball and things like that. And, somebody misses a pass or they miss a play, they tap their chest twice and then they go, my bad. And it's just a simple gesture that says, you know what, I own my stuff. So the book is really about that, is how do we bring accountability? The way I would relate that to relationships is all of us have been in that heated discussion with a loved one where at some point somebody says, stop shouting. And I'm not shouting. Well, yeah, you are shouting. Well, no, I'm not shouting. And then the argument shifts to who was shouting and whether you were actually shouting or not. But owning your stuff is about saying, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, maybe I can't hear myself. I can't see myself. Something that we both share is we were both dancers in high school. I was in theater. I was an actor, singer, dancer, and I loved doing it. But the thing that I loved most about being in the studio and practicing was there was mirrors all around the room, and you could see how you were behaving, and you can see when you're getting those moves right. In the common conversation, we don't have the recording. We don't have the mirrors. We don't know how we're actually showing up. So when someone tells you stop shouting, they're actually giving you valuable feedback for how that person is actually experiencing you. Before we started this, we had a great conversation about being your authentic self and showing up. But we don't know who our authentic selves are without that check.
Yep.
And there's nobody videotaping us. There's no mirrors around ever. So when someone says to me, stop shouting in that particular scenario, what I say is, you know what, I apologize if you're experiencing me as shouting. Let's take the temperature down in the room and let's start again, because obviously we're having this heated discussion because we're both passionate and we both care. So I really want to hear you. I want to listen to what you're saying, and I hope you can do the same for me. What do you say we come back to this? Let's restart. Let's re-kick. Most people don't expect that behavior. Half of them are going to pass out when you do it to them.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But could you imagine just in that moment owning your behaviors? Because you really don't know if you were actually yelling. So own thy stuff, kind of classically and broadly, is owning all of those behaviors and understanding that the only people in control of the things that we do on a daily basis is us. Right. We can't control others, but we certainly can control our own behaviors.
Yeah, and this is a conversation I've had with myself, with others, my kids, is about intent versus impact.
Yes.
And one of the things I will always say is, okay, I understand that was not my intent, but this is how it impacted you. And so I have to take responsibility for the impact that I created, even if that was not my intent, right? So that's also, for me, owning my stuff, right? Because while I may have thought, no, I'm not shouting, right? Because my kids would say it all the time, you're yelling. And I was like, do you really want to hear me yell? It's like, if you think this is yelling, oh, wait a second, hold on. Like, we're going to have a whole nother level here.
Classic.
Right? But I think it's about the impact, right? And understanding that everybody's coming to the conversation. You and I are coming to this conversation, completely different walks of life, things have already
Mhm.
happened in our day that have impacted us on how we got here and how we're showing up. And so I'm not going to always know what I'm saying to you is going to have a different impact than what I intended. But then we
Yes.
deal with the impact in the moment, especially when it
Hmm.
impacts in a way that was a negative impact. And so
Hmm.
I think that's part of that accountability, the responsibility of it all. So thank you for bringing that into this world because we need a little bit more accountability in our society at the moment.
Oh my gosh, yes. Hey, and at the end of the day, too, because, of course, you have children, spouse, you have family and everything, and they'll look at me. You wrote this book. You don't get it right all the time. I reserve the right to not get it right all the time. But what's really important is having the knowledge to self-correct when
Yes.
you're in that moment, as
Yes.
opposed to walking through life and not knowing what the corrective behavior could be. So that's what the book is for. It's not about perfection. It's
No.
about how do we get back to this stasis of health. Health
Yeah.
is a stasis. So how do we make our relationships healthy is by bringing it back to stasis.
No, that's beautiful. And I think really, really important. They always talk about how a plumber's house always leaks and a carpenter's house is always creaky, right? We're never perfect, right? This may be
So
our
true.
profession, but sometimes we don't necessarily always get it right what we're preaching. So sometimes we
Hmm.
have to have the lesson replayed back to us.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
I get it. Alrighty. So keeping this conversation moving forward, want to move into the next kind of segment of the show. We say names. And so I want to understand the story behind Machicote. What
Mm.
is the history that comes along with that name? And when you hear that name and when others hear their own names, how does that shift someone's belonging when their name is honored?
Mm. Oh my gosh, so good. So Machicote, the history behind that is it comes from Europe, back to the days of Columbus, Spanish, Italian. We believe at some point the name may have been changed or spelled incorrectly. So my dad is from Puerto Rico. So Machicote is a popular name in Puerto Rico, but it's also a very popular name in South America. So we know that somehow it had to do with Europeans meeting indigenous peoples. So that's where it's come from. The way that that's affected me growing up is it's so nebulous. No one hears the name Machicote anywhere. Matter of fact, 9 times out of 10, it's mispronounced. So I've heard macaroni, I've heard Machicote, I've heard
There's
manicotti,
no
you name
R.
it.
So where do they get macaroni
Oh,
from?
it's the most amazing thing to me. I was like, oh my God, syllabalize much? So, so I've had to deal with that all my life. And so this is where I got to the point where now, instead of being upset by it, I actually kind of make a joke of it,
Mm.
and we use it as a point of reference, just a place to meet. And when people do get it right, like sometimes a server will, they're looking at, they're staring at, they're like, wait, no, let me try. No, wait, Machicote, and they get it right. I celebrate them.
Yes.
You are 1 in 10 Americans that can actually get that right. Awesome for you. But growing up, it was a challenge to have a last name like that. And I grew up in Harlem, New York City, went to public school. And interestingly, there was a time in my life in New York City where there were the public schools that were kind of all over Manhattan, and the ones in Harlem were a whole bunch of people, honestly, that looked like me. And there was a mayor that decided, hey, you know what? There are talented kids, obviously, that are up in these particular areas. We want to test them in to see if we can populate some of the more expensive, very exclusive schools that were on Central Park West in New York City. So both my brother and I, for whatever reason, we still don't know why, but we had fifth grade reading levels in kindergarten. And both of us were able to do that. So we both tested into these private schools. So he went to a school called Ethical Culture, and I went to one called Alexander Robertson School. But what we found out very quickly, there weren't a whole lot of kids that looked like us.
Mm.
But it changed a lot of things for us because it took us out of the scenario of Harlem and then put us into a culture that, we were surrounded by the children of doctors and lawyers and professionals and ambassadors and things like that. So the school that I went to was so small, it only had kindergarten through sixth grade. And there was only one class of each. So I went to school with the same exact kids in the same exact class because the school was so tiny. It was just that one. So fifth grade went to sixth grade. And it wasn't like you switched classes. You were all part of the same thing. So growing up in that culture, and then at sixth grade being told, okay, well, you're coming back to Harlem now to go to school. In my own culture, I was an outcast because number one, the last name Machicote, nobody could figure out what that was. Is he black? Is he Hispanic? Is he Italian? And my background, is black Hispanic with an Italian last name. And by the way, he speaks like a Caucasian newscaster. So it was very confusing going back into Harlem where even the dialect was very, very different. So I wound up going to a school where I felt like an outcast and then graduating from that school and going home and still felt like an outcast. So people would beat me up because I was the smartest kid in the class. I mean, I could literally pass tests by just putting my book underneath my pillow, but I didn't speak like anybody else. I didn't really align with anybody else. So it was a very interesting place. It was a lonely place to be. And the most hateful thing that I think happened in the midst of that, because I wound up, both my brother and I got full ride scholarships. And these were people that were probably paying, I don't know, $15,000, $20,000 a year for their kids' education. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, that was a lot of money to be paying annually. I think I was in fourth grade and I was waiting outside for my grandmother to come and pick me up. And a woman passed by me, a parent, and said, you need to know that I think it is completely unfair that you get to go to this school free and my child has to be paid for. And the implication was I didn't deserve to be there. And to this day, I can make a whole bunch of assumptions about that. Maybe it's because I didn't look like all the other kids. Maybe it was that, I was scholarship to be in there. It wasn't like nobody was paying my tuition. Somebody was paying my tuition. So I was still paying tuition. It just wasn't mom. But in fourth grade, to have an adult come up to you and tell you you don't belong, if not in those many words, but to say, you got in here under false pretenses. We all know the pejorative use of the term DEI hire or DEI placement in school. Meanwhile, I could outsmart any single one of these kids in two different cultures. So the name Machicote comes along with a lot of pleasure, but also a lot of pain. It wasn't Smith. It wasn't Brown. It wasn't Perez. It wasn't Rodriguez. It was Machicote. And that was just a strange thing to be judged on the way you spoke and the way you looked, and then misclassified because people couldn't figure out what you were.
Yeah, so want to kind of keep teasing that out a little bit, because what took me back in this moment is that you had your moment of non-belonging when you were in the fourth grade that was inflicted on you by an adult, right? And a lot of conversations that I've been having so far with all the guests that I've had on the podcast so far is a lot of the stories of non-belonging would come when they were in college or they were at work, in adult life. And here you're coming with an example of in the fourth grade. And I'm thinking about my own son, right? And thinking about looking at him and going, wow, that's really young to be having that experience. And so even before this individual said those words to you, what were some of the quiet signals you were getting that told you, yeah, I don't know that I belong in this space?
Yeah. Well, of course, the first thing that you notice is not everybody looks like you. It wasn't like I had never seen Caucasian people before. Of course, Caucasian people lived in Harlem, but, just my day to day with my family and everything else, things felt like they were supposed to be a particular way. We grew up in MLK projects on 112th Street, and it was North Manhattan. And I didn't go to this school in kindergarten. I actually didn't go till the second grade. So I was only there for 4 years, second grade through sixth grade, but I was in public school. And I had a teacher who was Caucasian with red hair and absolutely loved her. And she embraced me as a student and I think helped push me along with that ability to read at a fifth grade level. She was really impressed by that and really drove it. And I believe she's the one who sent home the recommendation that I test in to this school. She was like, this child deserves better. He needs to be somewhere else. But yes, there were signals then, but let's put it this way. I knew what the difference was when I looked at people and I could see that there was a difference, but I didn't feel like my difference was lesser than until that moment.
Got it.
And then all of us, that's where I began to do things like lose confidence. So from fourth grade through sixth grade, which was the last 2 years of that school, my grades actually started to drop because I had lost confidence. When you're in fourth grade, how do you process you don't belong here? So the first thing I say is respect my elders. That was ingrained in me.
Right.
So it switched from, hey, you know what? You tested in here. You're really smart. You're like acing kids and acing tests, and you really don't have to work hard for it. To maybe she's right. And that thread lived on for a really, really long time until I, later in life as an adult got into therapy and re-witnessed that. And I think about things like imposter syndrome and everything else, and that very large voice so loud in my head that told me, you don't belong here. You got in here through a glitch or, somebody's charity in the system. You don't belong here. So it's really a dangerous message when somebody hears, even if you don't say it in those words, you don't belong here, because it triggers a whole bunch of other behaviors.
Yeah, and I think about that happened so long ago. Don't want to age you on the show.
I'm 62, so yeah.
But when I even think about in this moment that we're currently living in, how many people who look like you, let's just own it, right? So those of you who are listening in, not visually, but only in audio, I'm a white guy, Joe is Black Puerto Rican, so there's definitely a visual difference. And so how many times do our colleagues of color get told, you don't belong here because, right? Or you took somebody's seat, right? I mean, how many times have we heard this in the recent past? So I think that we have, unfortunately, have not come past that. And part of the conversation we were having before we hit the record button was, how are we making sure that we actually do this real work and figure out the racism and sexism and homophobia that's happening in our culture so that we can actually root that out and not just put a Band-Aid over it? Yes. And so that's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation, right? Because I want to bring these stories to life so that we can actually examine what's going on in our culture and learn from the mistakes of the past so that we don't repeat them. So thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable.
Absolutely.
In that moment.
And Christopher, thank you for bringing it up and just sharing that part too. Much to your point, I'm now carrying my passport with me.
Yes.
I know that the name Machicote shows up in South America. Even though I was born in New York City, Manhattan, I don't know if my name is going to show up in a register or anything like that. So I now carry my passport with me. Because if I'm asked for my papers, I don't want to be a part of somebody's dragnet and mistakenly spend a few months in prison.
Wow.
So,
And just some of the things that we just don't, sometimes I don't even think about. Things I don't necessarily have to think about all the time, just given my white privilege, given my last name. So thank you for sharing that. Alrighty, so if you're good, I would like to start turning this to more. Let's start to bring this upbeat a little bit of the conversation. I want to find out the moment that you knew you belonged. Where were you? What were the signals that were happening around you that made it undeniable and that you were able to say, "I know I belong"?
Yes. So I will tell you, I've probably had more moments of feeling that I belonged than not. You know, the horrible ones were the horrible ones. But to your point, I don't want to make it sound so negative. Just, you know, the last name thing is a very, very powerful thing.
Yes.
But after leaving that school, and then, you know, I went to a Catholic school called Our Lady Queen of Angels, and I was kind of back home, but even a little ostracized by, you know, people who I grew up in the same neighborhood. But when I moved to the Bronx, my mother, right after I finished middle school, I went to high school at Truman High School, and it was an extremely diverse culture there. And I didn't feel the same type of separation. You know, it was a massive city with 35 buildings. I want to say like 15,000 families, all in this communal living that had its own schools, its own shopping centers, even had its own police force. And when I felt most like I belong was when my name wasn't an issue. It didn't feel like who I was and who I was representing was an issue because there was such a diverse group of people. I really, really started to fit in, you know, much to what you were talking about. Dancing in high school was when I joined the theater. And in the theater, it's just a very, very different community. You're not getting together based on color or race or sex or anything like that. You're getting together based on talent. Honestly, being a little bit of a nerd, you know, loving attention, loving to be on stage, loving to belt my voice, and know that the reason people are clapping or not clapping has nothing to do with what you represent. It has to do with the delivery of your art.
Yes.
And so it almost feels like a deflection, but it's just so satisfying that people accepted you based on your talent. You know, and through all the other stuff, it didn't matter what you look like, didn't matter what you walk like, talk like, didn't matter. It was based on your talent.
Yeah. So you're bringing back up a moment of belonging for me too. So I could remember I grew up in New Jersey, South Jersey, and there's this place called the Apple Farm, and it's an arts camp. And I got a scholarship from my high school to go. Interestingly enough, awesome. I got a singing scholarship, but I went to be a dance major. Because that's what I wanted to do. But one of the minors you could do was musical theater. And so I took that. And for the end performance, we were doing the opening number from Tommy. And still at the time, I was still a soprano, right? This was going from sophomore to junior year of high school. And my voice still hadn't broke yet. Like it was really high. You know, I talk about how I used to be able to sing Christine Daae's part from Phantom of the Opera, clear as a bell, and it would make a lot of girls in high school really mad. But when you talk about talent, right, I would always want to go for the soprano roles because that was just where I was comfortable. But because I was a boy, I couldn't sing those roles. Well, the way they made us audition for the opening number, because the boy who's singing is a soprano, and don't make me sing it now because that won't sound good. But they made everybody close their eyes. And so we had to sing blind. And then I knew that the teachers, the adults, they weren't, because they would tap you on your shoulder when they no longer wanted you to keep singing. And I was singing and singing and singing, and nobody had tapped me on the shoulder. And I started to hear these gasps in the room, right? And all of a sudden it came down and they tapped me on the shoulder, and I opened my eyes, and I was the last one standing in the middle of the room.
Love that.
Right. In that moment, the entire class just opened with applause. And I was like, I have found my people, right? And for being this kid who was completely bullied, you know, my music teacher loved her dearly, but she was very adamant about breaking my falsetto. And, you know, which I wish we wouldn't have done that because it probably would have had a different career. But I think in that moment, I felt truly authentic. Right. Yes. And so that was the moment I knew I also belonged. Yeah. You know, and so thank you for also bringing me down memory lane, because I think theater, which I don't think a lot of people appreciate, is where you can bring people together from all walks of life. And it is truly about talent, right? You
Yes.
got it or you don't. There's no faking until you make it.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
okay, friend, I want to keep this conversation moving just a little bit longer. And I want to get into this engineer side of your brain that we alluded to at the beginning of the show.
Mm.
So,
hmm
if belonging had an engineering blueprint, what
Yes.
components would be present, and what do you think is most often missing in organizations?
Mm. So I believe that every organization starts with a mission statement, and then they have values as well, right? All of those things are beautifully written and they sound absolutely amazing. And, and we post them up on the wall, and there's, big expectations that living into this mission and our values is going to make us wonderful. It's going to make us profitable and so on. Very rarely are those things actually tied to accountability for what happens when that person is not living by the values. What happens when a person has misinterpreted the values and delivers it a different way, right? So if there's a value around effective communication and your communication style is to tell people what they do by banging them on the head and calling them names, that person could argue, you asked for effective communication. I'm effective because people do what I tell them to do. But there's a way to get to that, and that formula is respect and trust. If you don't have respect and you don't have trust, it is almost impossible to influence somebody.
Yes.
Now, if you have a gun, you can influence them, but that is fear-based influence,
Yes.
right? That is not trust-based influence, and there's a big difference between the two of those things. So when I think about engineering a culture, it's taking all of those wonderful things that you're saying that you're doing and then building them into a system of accountability. So, for instance, at Premier, where I work right now, we've created what we call the One Premier growth mindset. And the One Premier is about how we behave with each other and how we act as an organization. The growth mindset is how do we continue to be a high-performing team and understand how our behaviors work. So what we did was we actually blueprinted the culture, how we want it to be. So it starts, number one, with self-mastery. That's the key tenet, is when I wake up in the morning, who do I bring to work?
Yes.
And for me, it starts with a mantra, and that's to leave everything and everyone a little bit better than I found them.
Yes.
When I think through that growth mindset, whether it's a great conversation or a difficult conversation, if my goal is to leave you better than I found you, that conversation, even the difficult conversation, is going to sound very different than if I live through the mantra of, I just need to tell this person what to do because we need to be high performing.
Right.
So it's almost looking through the lens of love. And so how I wake up every morning and how I decide to end every day is looking backwards and saying, who do I feel I left better today? But more importantly, the piece of accountability to that is finding out the next day, did I leave you better than I found you yesterday in our conversation? Or whenever that next meeting is. Because again, we don't have the mirrors, we don't have the videotapes to know how we're showing up. So the only other thing to do is ask for 360 feedback.
Yes.
Right? So self-mastery is where it starts. Second is, how do I communicate? So we call it real talk behavior. And REAL is an acronym. It stands for respect in the right environment with accountable language, accountable for our behaviors. And the L, which is a big L, is for listening. So am I able to listen to you without necessarily judgment, just hear and take it all in, and then be curious as opposed to being judgmental about what it is you've just heard? So that's what real talk communication is. So you've got self-mastery, real talk. The third level of that is then establishing multi-level trust. And, the way that we get to trust in any one of our relationships, there's only two ways to build a relationship that any human being can do. It's what I say and what I do. That's it. Those are the two key ingredients to building a relationship: what I say and what I do. So as we built out the structural context for what the culture was going to be, those three pieces are the main pieces: self-mastery, real talk, and then building multi-level trust. What that allows you to do is, okay, so now we're going to build a more change capable organization because we're having conversations about this change. It's transparency and so on. It allows us to build clarity and alignment because we have a way of delivering the hard, tough conversations that people need to hear. So there are outcomes from those three pieces. So when I talk about the cultural engineering, it's taking all those pieces that you already have and then turning them into a series of actions and behaviors. Now, do we get it right every time? Of course not, because we're human. But once you have the structure and the system, you can go back to the diagram. It's like building a building.
Yep.
An architect comes and says, hey, you know what? You put all the sockets in the wrong place. Well, how do you know that? Well, because we have a common language called a blueprint that says those sockets were placed in the wrong place.
Yep.
But now we know enough and we can align on the blueprint to say, okay, now let's go back and fix where we put those sockets because they're in the wrong places.
Yes. And when you want to evolve the organization, what's the load-bearing wall? What are the things that are so foundational we can't move?
Yes.
Right? But what are the things that we can move, right? But we need the blueprint so we don't knock down the wrong wall. Because if we knock down the wrong wall, the whole thing could come tumbling down.
Absolutely.
What a great analogy. Okay, so I have one more bonus question for you.
Absolutely.
So if you could etch one line from Own Thy Stuff into every leader's mirror, what would it say and what would you want them to do tomorrow morning differently because of it?
Yes. Well, I truly believe that my mantra, if it was a global mantra, we'd be in a better place. So etched in the glass would be, remember to leave everything and everyone a little bit better than you found it today. That would be etched in the glass. Again, because when you go in with a mindset like that, it changes your behavior, it changes the outcome, and it changes the behavior you receive back.
Really powerful, really powerful. It also reminds me of Maya Angelou's quote, people forget what you said, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so how are you just making people a little bit better and take that beyond the person, right? It's like, how are you, when you go to somebody's house, how are you making sure that you're leaving it a little bit better? When you go to the park, how are you leaving it a little bit better than when you found it, right? All those little things, right? It's like, fix the broken window. So
throw your trash away.
Pick
up after your dog.
Right. Or just pick up after everything, right? Leave the place better than what you found it. Okay, my friend, this has been a riveting conversation. So I'm asking everybody to finish the phrase, I know I belong when. So Joe, I know I belong when?
I know I belong when respect is present. Both ways. The Latin meaning of respect is to look again. And when we can take a secondary look instead of the first primary look that we see, and we're all human beings, we're going to take a primary look. When you're walking down the street, you're going to notice if a person is tall, short, male, female, and you're going to make a whole bunch of assumptions based on where you've been with that. But to look again means to take a little bit deeper look. And if we work on our relationships and we truly try to, in those relationships, leave people a little bit better than we found them, it changes the whole dynamic of human interactivity. I think the thing people forget today is that, there's only one globe, there's only one Earth that we know. And there's no escape, guys. It's not like you can just fly off to another planet. Like, I'm tired of this place, I'm going to fly off to another planet. If we don't take care of each other in this space, it's the only space that we've got. So if we don't take care of one another and make that decision, things are going to get worse.
Yes.
So how do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of it? How do we take care for future generations? There's got to be a change, and we've got to leave it better than we found it.
You are absolutely right. And what a great way to end this conversation. Joe, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I know you have left me a better person today by having this conversation.
Go!
So thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. So exciting. And again, just honored to be here, Christopher. You are amazing from the first time that we met. And I'm so glad you're doing this. And I can't think of anybody better to lead conversations like this. So amazing. Go for it. Wonderful job.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This has been a great reminder that belonging is not a destination. It is a practice, and it starts with listening. Friends, if this episode challenged you to move outside your comfort zone, please follow our show and give us that 5-star review you know you want to give, and add a comment about what you will do to champion a culture of belonging. These actions will help to amplify the message to others so they too can find their own moment of belonging. Whether it is navigating the complexities of workplace culture, finding acceptance in a new school, building trust in a local community, or forging identities within our own families, these stories reflect the raw, honest, and unfiltered journeys each of us take every day. And we want to hear from you. Finish the sentence, "I know I belong when," and send us a voice note. Your story could open a future episode. Thank you for listening. Know that your bold, authentic self is welcomed, valued, and loved. And until next time, remember, you belong here.